World War II is often remembered for its massive battles, the thunder of tanks in the Ardennes, the roar of planes over London, and the firestorms of the Pacific. But there was another war, hidden from public view, a war of silence, deception, and intelligence. It was fought not with rifles, but with radios, ciphers, and invisible ink. This was the War of Spies, and in this shadowy conflict, something extraordinary happened. When Nazi Germany sent spies into the United States, they expected confusion, incompetence, and opportunity. What they found instead was a nation surprisingly alert, organized, and, to their shock, almost impossible to fool. Within weeks, sometimes days, German agents were tracked down, captured, and neutralized. To the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence, it was unthinkable. How had America, still seen as naive and inexperienced in espionage, uncovered them so quickly? To understand that shock, we must first look at what the Germans believed about the United States and how reality shattered those assumptions. In the early 1940s, the Abwehr, under Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, faced a global challenge. Their spies operated across Europe, Africa, and the Americas. In occupied countries, they gathered military secrets and sabotaged enemy industries. But in the United States, the Abwehr saw a golden opportunity. Before Pearl Harbor, the U.S. was still technically neutral. German shipping agents, businessmen, and diplomats moved freely. Nazi propaganda described Americans as materialistic, careless, and soft. A popular belief in Berlin was that Americans had no head for secrecy. They were talkative, trusting, and too focused on making money to notice a few foreign agents. When the Abwehr began recruiting for missions to America, these stereotypes played a large role. Spies were told that American police were poorly coordinated, that intelligence agencies barely communicated, and that the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover was more concerned with catching bank robbers than foreign agents. One German officer put it bluntly, "In America, espionage will be as easy as breathing. They have no Gestapo." It was a fatal miscalculation. The most famous example of German shock came with Operation Pastorius in 1942. Named after Franz Daniel Pastorius, an early German settler in colonial America, this mission was designed to bring destruction to the U.S. industrial heartland. The plan: send 8 saboteurs by submarine to American shores. Their targets: power plants, railways, aluminum factories, and bridges. The men were handpicked by the Abwehr. They were trained in sabotage at a secret school near Berlin. They learned how to make timers, incendiary devices, and detonators. They practiced laying explosives on rail tracks and blending into crowds. On paper, it looked professional. The leader was George John Dash, a German-American who had lived in the U.S. before. He spoke fluent English, dressed like an American, and understood the culture. In June 1942, 2 German submarines, U-202 and U-584, carried the teams across the Atlantic. Dash's group landed first on June 13th at Amagansett Beach, Long Island, New York. The second group arrived 4 days later near Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. But within hours, the entire operation began to unravel. It was still dark when the first group rowed their rubber boat to shore. Dash and his men wore German Navy uniforms during the landing. Their orders were clear. If captured immediately, the uniforms would give them prisoner of war status rather than execution as spies. Once ashore, they changed into civilian clothes and buried their uniforms, explosives, and equipment in the sand dunes. At around midnight, a young U.S. Coast Guardsman named John C. Cullen noticed something unusual. He was on patrol near the beach when he saw shadows moving. As he approached, Dash stepped out of the darkness and confronted him. Cullen recalled later, "A man came toward me, speaking English with a strange accent. He said they were fishermen who had lost their boat." Cullen wasn't convinced. He noticed something metallic behind the dunes, perhaps a crate or a box. When he pressed further, Dash pulled him aside. He whispered, "You don't want to get hurt, do you?" He handed Cullen a wad of cash, about $260, and told him to forget what he saw. Cullen pretended to agree, took the money, and left. The moment he returned to his post, he reported the encounter. Within hours, the FBI was on the scene. They found footprints, buried supplies, and the remains of German uniforms. For the Germans, it was already over, and they didn't even know it yet. By dawn, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was informed. Within 48 hours, the Bureau had launched one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. Contrary to German expectations, the FBI in 1942 was not a small, disorganized agency. Under Hoover, it had become a national intelligence force with agents in every major city, trained in forensics, cryptography, and counter-espionage. They coordinated through a centralized communications system and could act across state lines, something rare for police at the time. Agents quickly learned that another group of saboteurs was expected. They intercepted radio messages from the Abwehr and began surveilling German consulates and known sympathizers. But the real twist came from within the German team itself. George Dash, the mission leader, was no ordinary spy. He had lived in America for years and had grown to admire the country. He disliked Nazi ideology and often quarreled with his superiors in training. When he realized the mission was doomed, he made a shocking decision. On June 19, 1942, less than a week after landing, Dash took a train to Washington, D.C. He checked into the Mayflower Hotel under his real name and called the FBI, asking to speak to the director. At first, they thought he was a crank, but when he mentioned Operation Pastorius and gave details only a German agent could know, they brought him in. For 10 hours, Dash spoke. He revealed everything: names, locations, objectives, and submarine routes. By the end of the day, the entire German sabotage network in America was exposed. Within 2 weeks, all 8 saboteurs were in custody. Not one had succeeded in planting a single bomb. When news of the arrests reached Berlin, the Abwehr leadership was stunned. The operation had taken months to plan. The men had trained for half a year, and yet, within 14 days, the Americans had captured them all. The speed of discovery baffled German intelligence. How had the Americans located the second team in Florida so quickly? How did they know every name and detail? At first, German officials suspected that one of the saboteurs had been tortured into confession. But even then, the efficiency of the FBI's response was alarming. In Berlin's intelligence circles, reports circulated that the United States must have a powerful internal spy network. They imagined a secret police system rivaling their own. The idea that a single agent, Dash himself, had voluntarily betrayed them seemed too unbelievable. When the truth finally became clear, that Dash had simply walked into the FBI office and confessed, the reaction was disbelief mixed with fury. To the Abwehr, it was an act of unforgivable weakness. Dash and his accomplice Ernst Berger were condemned as traitors in absentia. Their families in Germany faced harassment and surveillance. But beyond anger, there was fear. If America could unravel a complex mission so fast, what did that mean for future operations? J. Edgar Hoover saw Operation Pastorius as a gift. He used it to prove that the FBI was not just a domestic police force, but a vital arm of national defense. Hoover personally oversaw the interrogation, the press management, and the public narrative. Within days, newspapers across the United States carried dramatic headlines. Nazi saboteurs caught. FBI foils German terror plot. Photographs of the captured spies were published, but details were carefully controlled. Hoover emphasized the Bureau's efficiency and vigilance. He portrayed the arrests as evidence that America's home front was secure. Behind the scenes, President Franklin D. Roosevelt approved a military tribunal to try the men in secret. The trial took place in July 1942 inside the Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C. 6 of the 8 were sentenced to death. Dash and Berger, who had cooperated, were imprisoned instead. They would later be deported to Germany after the war, where they were viewed not as heroes, but as traitors. For German intelligence officers, the lesson was bitter. They had underestimated not only the FBI's competence, but also America's unity and resolve. In Berlin, the failure of Operation Pastorius became a warning case. Canaris, head of the Abwehr, ordered an internal review. The conclusions were disturbing. Reports showed that the mission's collapse was not due only to betrayal, but to a fundamental misunderstanding of American society. German planners had assumed that America's size and diversity would make it easy for spies to disappear. But in reality, wartime patriotism had made Americans highly vigilant. Neighbors reported suspicious activity. Local police communicated with the FBI. Factories had their own security officers. In Germany, people had learned to avoid speaking to authorities. In America, ordinary citizens called the authorities eagerly. One intelligence analyst in Berlin reportedly said, "In Germany, silence is safety. In America, silence is guilt." The Abwehr realized that the American information ecosystem, newspapers, radio bulletins, and even rumor networks, worked against covert operations. Every movement, every foreign accent, every unusual behavior could quickly become national news. The myth of an unprepared, careless America had died. Despite the Pastorius disaster, the Abwehr tried again. Several smaller operations followed, but the outcome was always the same. In 1944, a mission known as Operation Elster sent 2 agents, William Colpore and Eric Gimpel, to spy on American industry. They landed by submarine near Hancock, Maine, and traveled by train to New York City. Their orders were to gather intelligence about rocket and atomic research. But again, within weeks, they were caught. Colpore, an American defector who had joined the Germans, quickly lost his nerve. He turned himself in and told the FBI everything. Gimpel was captured soon after. By that point, even the Germans themselves joked that no spy returns from America. the speed of American counterintelligence had become legendary and terrifying. So how did the United States manage to be so effective? The answer lies in a combination of organization, communication, and psychology. First, the FBI's centralized structure gave it nationwide reach. Unlike German police forces, which were divided between military, political, and regional bodies, the FBI operated under one command. Hoover's obsession with files, records, and cross-referencing allowed agents to connect clues rapidly. Second, America's social openness, something the Germans mocked, became its strength. People were used to sharing information, not hiding it. Taxi drivers, hotel clerks, and neighbors reported anything odd. The same friendliness that spies hoped to exploit became the reason they were exposed. Third, the timing. After Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the U.S. entered the war with a surge of patriotic unity. Every town had defense committees, volunteer spotters, and loyalty leagues. When foreign-looking men with German accents rented rooms or bought strange supplies, it was noticed. Finally, the FBI used public fear strategically. By publicizing each captured spy, they discouraged others from trying. The message was clear. America is watching. You will be caught. For German agents, the message worked all too well. Many German operatives who had been considered for American missions quietly refused or requested reassignment. They preferred Europe or North Africa, anywhere but the United States. A few who managed to reach American soil without being caught often found themselves isolated, unable to communicate with Berlin. Their radios were detected or jammed. Their funds, German marks and counterfeit dollars, aroused suspicion. One Abwehr report from 1943 described America as a land where no man can vanish. Every purchase, every trip, every telephone call left a trail. For German intelligence officers, it was both baffling and terrifying. How could a democracy, a place they viewed as chaotic and free, be so efficient at control? The answer lay in technology and trust. The FBI and U.S. Army signal intelligence had developed new ways to trace radio signals. By triangulating transmissions, they could locate enemy transmitters within hours. German agents who tried to contact Berlin were often tracked before they could finish a message. Censorship of letters and telegrams also played a role. Mail from German-sounding names or foreign addresses was screened. Even commercial shipments were monitored for hidden codes or microfilm. And then there was money, one of the biggest giveaways. German agents often carried large sums of cash. They assumed that Americans used mostly physical currency, not realizing how unusual large cash transactions looked in small towns. Banks reported suspicious deposits. Hotels reported unusual guests. In a society obsessed with documentation, every German spy stood out like a stain on white paper. For the German agents who were captured alive, interrogation revealed another layer of surprise, cultural shock. They had been trained to believe that Americans were undisciplined, self-indulgent, and lazy. Instead, they met interrogators who were methodical, calm, and frighteningly informed. One captured spy told his interrogator, "You know more about me than my own commander did." The FBI had dossiers not just on the agents, but on their families, their school records, and even their favorite cigarettes. agents were astonished that such detailed files existed in a free country. Another noted, "In Germany, we fear the Gestapo. In America, the police smile and still know everything." To these spies, America's efficiency combined with friendliness was incomprehensible. They expected brutality and found bureaucracy. They expected chaos and found order. That was perhaps the greatest shock of all. The story of German espionage in America is not one of daring success, but of quiet failure. Not a single major sabotage mission succeeded. Factories continued to run. Bridges stood. Munitions poured out to the front lines. For the Abwehr, it was humiliating. For Hoover, it was triumph. Yet in the shadows, there were no heroes. Only human beings caught between duty, fear, and disillusionment. George Dash, the man who betrayed his mission, spent 6 years in prison. When he returned to Germany after the war, he was despised. He lived the rest of his life in obscurity, never fully accepted by either side. But his decision had saved thousands of lives and revealed to the world how prepared America truly was. By the end of the war, German intelligence had effectively abandoned plans for further operations on U.S. soil. They had learned a hard lesson. America, for all its openness and democracy, could defend itself with a quiet and deadly efficiency. The failure of the Abwehr's missions also contributed to internal distrust within German intelligence. By 1944, Hitler himself believed that spies and saboteurs were being double-crossed, or that the Abwehr was riddled with traitors. This paranoia led to Canaris's downfall. He was arrested in 1944 and executed in 1945. Ironically, America's success in counterintelligence was built not on fear, but on public cooperation and communication. The very freedom that Germany scorned became the weapon that defeated their secrecy. In the end, the German spies who came to America discovered something their training never prepared them for. They learned that freedom and order were not opposites. In America, they coexisted, and together they created a nation almost impossible to infiltrate. The speed with which the FBI caught them became legendary, whispered in Abwehr offices as a cautionary tale. America, it turned out, was not just strong on the battlefield. It was strong in the shadows, too. For the spies who crossed the Atlantic dreaming of chaos, what they found was a land of watchful eyes, sharp minds, and unexpected unity. They came as hunters. They became the hunted. And they never forgot how quickly and quietly America found them. After the failure of Operation Pastorius in 1942, German intelligence officers in Berlin found themselves asking a haunting question. How could a supposedly immature intelligence service like the FBI dismantle their networks so fast? What they didn't know was that America's counterintelligence success was not only about quick reaction, it was about anticipation. Behind the headlines and public arrests, the FBI and Army intelligence had quietly built one of the most effective deception networks of the Second World War. A system designed to lure, monitor, and neutralize foreign agents before they could act. It was a war that never made it to the front page, but it shaped the entire course of espionage in the Western Hemisphere. This section reveals how America learned to play the spy game like a grandmaster, using patience deception, and a weapon the Nazis never expected: information control. After the triumph of 1942, J. Edgar Hoover became obsessed with maintaining the upper hand. He saw the spy war as both a national security issue and a personal campaign to prove that America could outthink the Axis. He gathered his senior agents and issued a new directive. From this point on, we will not only catch spies, we will study them. We will learn their habits, their codes, their methods, and we will turn them against their masters. Hoover wanted total information dominance. He expanded the FBI's Domestic Intelligence Division, creating specialized sections for espionage, foreign propaganda, and code breaking. By 1943, over 4,000 agents were dedicated to counterintelligence, a number that dwarfed anything Germany expected. In his private memos, Hoover described the FBI as a vast listening post, a machine for absorbing every whisper of subversion across the continent. And the key to its success lay in cooperation. Unlike Nazi Germany, where rival agencies constantly competed for control, the Gestapo, SD, and Abwehr often sabotaging one another, the United States built an ecosystem of collaboration. The FBI, Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, Army G2, and Office of Strategic Services, OSS, formed overlapping networks that shared data through coded teletype lines. Every intercepted cable, suspicious passport, or radio transmission was logged in a shared index called the Interdepartmental Intelligence Exchange, IDX. That system allowed agents in New York to instantly alert officers in Miami, Chicago, or San Francisco about suspects using similar aliases or travel patterns. To a foreign spy used to fragmented bureaucracies, this seamless coordination was nightmarish. No matter where they went, the net followed them. After the Pastorius case, Hoover realized something powerful. Captured spies were not just liabilities. They were assets. He ordered his field offices to turn, not burn. Whenever possible, arrested agents were to be offered leniency in exchange for cooperation. The FBI's first major success came from a lesser-known operation in South America. In 1943, a German courier named Johann Wenzel, operating between Argentina and Mexico, was caught carrying microfilm encoded with Abwehr instructions. Instead of executing him, the Americans persuaded him to send false reports back to Germany. They fed him carefully curated information, most of it harmless but believable, and monitored every response. This strategy, known as a double cross, turned the spy war into a chess match. Each move by Berlin was anticipated, shaped, or quietly redirected by Washington. German intelligence officers were convinced they still had active networks in the Americas. In truth, most of those networks were now controlled by the FBI. One of the most secret weapons in America's intelligence arsenal was radio deception. Every spy sent abroad by the Abwehr was expected to carry a portable transmitter to maintain contact with Berlin. These radios were large, heavy, and often used specific frequency bands that could be triangulated. The U.S. Army Signal Intelligence Service developed HF/DF, high-frequency direction finding. It allowed them to locate transmitters with astonishing precision. But the real brilliance lay in what came next. Instead of shutting down captured transmitters, agents sometimes continued to use them, posing as the German spies themselves. This technique first perfected by the British double-cross system, was quickly adopted in the United States. Captured spies would be forced or convinced to send routine reports home under FBI supervision. Berlin would continue replying, unaware that it was communicating directly with Washington. In several cases, these radio ghosts were used to request more spies, who were then immediately intercepted upon arrival. By 1944, entire sections of the Abwehr's American network were essentially being run by the FBI itself. While the British carried out the famous Operation Fortitude, the massive deception plan to hide the D-Day invasion, American intelligence conducted its own quieter version. In 1943 and 1944, fake communications networks in the United States transmitted hundreds of false signals about military shipments, aircraft production, and experimental weapons. These signals were designed to confuse any listening Axis agents or sympathizers in the Western Hemisphere. Intercepted by German naval intelligence, these reports painted a wildly inaccurate picture of U.S. strategy, suggesting, for example, that America planned large-scale amphibious operations in Africa or South America. Every false report confirmed what Berlin already believed, that America was disorganized and unpredictable. In truth, every piece of misinformation had been planted with surgical precision. By 1943, German agents still occasionally tried to enter the U.S. through Latin America or Canada. But they faced an enemy far more advanced than before. The FBI had learned to profile spies before they even arrived. Agents compiled thousands of behavioral templates, people who paid rent in cash, men who avoided small talk in bars, women who refused to give local addresses or avoided photographs. These subtle red flags were shared with police, hotel clerks, and even train conductors. America had turned its entire population into a nationwide detection grid. To blend in was nearly impossible. One captured spy, Heinrich Werdelmann, later told interrogators at Fort Hunt, Virginia, "We were taught to fear the Gestapo. No one warned us about the Americans. They don't shout, they just know." Another invisible advantage was America's progress in cryptography. While the British had Bletchley Park, the United States had Arlington Hall, located just outside Washington, D.C. There, civilian mathematicians and linguists, many of them women, worked day and night to break German ciphers. The Abwehr used a system of one-time pads and Enigma variants for its overseas traffic. But by 1943, U.S. cryptanalysts could often identify and trace these messages even if they couldn't fully decrypt them. That was enough to expose patterns. Who was sending messages, where, and when? These traffic analyses were then shared with the FBI, which matched them with reports from field agents. The result? A near-complete map of Abwehr radio activity across the Americas. Every time a new transmitter appeared, local authorities already had a suspect list ready. For German intelligence, it was like walking into a room where every wall was mirrored. The war of spies was not limited to the U.S. mainland. From 1941 onward, Latin America became a critical battleground for intelligence control. Germany had built strong commercial and political ties across South America, especially in Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. German expatriate communities provided natural cover for agents and couriers. But after the United States entered the war, Hoover extended the FBI's reach southward under the Special Intelligence Service, SIS. The SIS established secret offices in more than a dozen countries, often under the guise of attachés or trade officials. Their job? Identify, disrupt, and recruit German operatives. By 1943, the SIS had dismantled over 200 pro-German networks across the continent. Many of the agents they caught were stunned by how much the Americans already knew. Their mail had been read, their bank accounts frozen, and their contacts compromised, sometimes before they even began work. One Abwehr courier, captured in Brazil, reportedly said, "We thought the Americans had spies in heaven itself." Captured German spies were not merely questioned, they were studied. At Fort Hunt, a secret facility near Alexandria, Virginia, codenamed P.O. Box 1142, U.S. intelligence officers interrogated enemy agents, U-boat crews, and scientists. The interrogators, many of them German-speaking refugees, understood both the psychology and the pride of their prisoners. They often used courtesy and curiosity rather than threats. Agents were offered cigarettes, coffee, and friendly conversation. It was disarming. Most German captives expected cruelty. Instead, they found calm professionalism. That contrast broke their resistance. The transcripts reveal recurring phrases. "You already know everything." "It's useless to hide." "How could you possibly know that?" These reactions became part of the legend, the belief that America's surveillance was omnipresent. In reality, it was a combination of data, collaboration, and the sheer predictability of human behavior. To the German mind of the 1930s and 1940s, the United States was a paradox. On one hand, it was seen as rich, technologically advanced, and industrially powerful. On the other, it was considered culturally immature, a place of jazz, consumerism, and endless chatter. Abwehr analysts assumed such a society would be easy to infiltrate. After all, Americans were open, friendly, and loud. How could they possibly keep secrets? But that same openness meant the population was hyper-aware of outsiders. In a small Midwestern town, a stranger's accent or unusual habits stood out immediately. In big cities, clerks and officials took pride in helping catch the enemy. Every citizen had become a potential watcher. To German operatives trained in paranoia and compartmentalization, this was an alien environment. They were used to secrecy enforced by fear. In America, secrecy was maintained through pride and participation. This cultural reversal, openness as security, was something no Abwehr training manual had prepared them for. By 1944, reports returning to Berlin painted a grim picture. Missions vanished. Couriers stopped responding. Submarines sent to deliver new agents never heard back from shore. Inside the Abwehr's headquarters on Tirpitzufer Street, morale began to collapse. Admiral Canaris, already under suspicion for anti-Nazi sentiments, struggled to explain the failures. At one meeting, an officer reportedly remarked, "Perhaps the Americans have the devil himself working for them." Some suggested that the U.S. had developed new electronic surveillance beyond imagination. Others believed the British were intercepting everything and feeding it to Washington. Whatever the theory, the conclusion was the same. America had become impenetrable. The Abwehr gradually shifted focus back to Europe, abandoning hopes of meaningful operations on U.S. soil. After the war, several captured German agents who survived imprisonment reflected on their experiences. Their memoirs and testimonies offer a window into the emotional shock they felt. Erich Gimpel, the agent from Operation Elster, later wrote a book titled Spy for Germany. In it, he admitted that he had been unprepared for the efficiency of American law enforcement. The Americans were everywhere, he wrote. One could not move, not breathe, without being noticed. Another captured agent, Heinrich Heinck, described his interrogation in New York. They smiled, offered me coffee, and then showed me my own photograph taken in Lisbon. That's when I knew the game was finished. To many, these experiences destroyed the myth of German superiority in intelligence work. They realized that while the Abwehr was fractured and politicized, the Americans were methodical, patient, and united by purpose. Beyond capture and failure, there was a deeper emotional reaction: humiliation. German officers had been taught to view the U.S. as a nation of amateurs. To be outsmarted by those very amateurs was a blow to personal and national pride. At the Nuremberg trials, even former intelligence officials admitted that American counter-espionage had been unexpectedly disciplined. This humiliation lingered long after the war. It forced a re-evaluation of what intelligence truly meant. It wasn't brutality or secrecy that made an agency strong. It was communication, trust, and adaptability. The Abwehr, built on fear and hierarchy, could never compete with that. During the war, the FBI developed a distinct style of intelligence work, part detective work, part bureaucracy, and part theater. Agents were trained to document every action, to use psychology as much as force, and to project calm authority. Hoover understood the power of image. His agents wore suits, not uniforms. They carried notebooks, not whips. To German spies raised in a militarized society, this quiet professionalism was unsettling. They were used to command, not questioning. In America, every agent was both investigator and analyst, a concept foreign to German thinking. This approach influenced the post-war intelligence world profoundly. When the CIA was formed in 1947, many of its structures were modeled on Hoover's wartime systems. By the end of World War II, the United States had transformed into a surveillance state, but one powered by volunteers. Millions of Americans participated in civil defense efforts, spotting aircraft, guarding factories, reporting suspicious letters or conversations. Billboards urged citizens to keep it confidential, and careless talk costs lives. Every household radio carried FBI bulletins about loyalty and vigilance. This collective awareness made infiltration almost impossible. Ironically, the same culture of openness that once seemed like America's weakness became its armor. In a land where everyone talked, silence became the loudest signal. In February 1944, Hitler dissolved the Abwehr, accusing it of incompetence and treason. Its remaining operations were absorbed by the Reich Main Security Office, RSHA, under Heinrich Himmler. Canaris was arrested that same year and later executed in April 1945. His agency, once the pride of German espionage, had been undone by its own arrogance and internal divisions. In Berlin's ruins after the war, surviving officers looked back with bitterness. They remembered the American miracle, the invisible network that had stopped them at every turn. To them, it seemed supernatural, but it was not magic. It was method. When the dust settled, historians began to compare the intelligence operations of both sides. The verdict was clear. While Germany had tactical brilliance on the battlefield, it lacked strategic intelligence vision. America, in contrast, learned quickly, built systematically, and adapted relentlessly. Captured agents testified to the same conclusion. The Americans didn't just react, they predicted. Their ability to connect clues across thousands of miles, to analyze personalities, and to anticipate behavior represented a new era of intelligence work. This was the beginning of modern espionage, not based on guns and disguises, but on data, psychology, and networks. When the surviving German agents were deported or exchanged after the war, many spoke with grudging admiration for the system that defeated them. They had come expecting naive policemen. They had found professionals who combined science, law, and cunning in perfect balance. One of them reportedly said, upon leaving his American prison, "You Americans fight with reason, not rage. That is why you win." To the FBI and its allies, the spy war became a quiet legacy, proof that the United States could protect itself, not just with weapons, but with intelligence. And for the German spies who experienced it firsthand, the memory never faded. The shock of being found, the disbelief at being outwitted, and the respect for an enemy they had so completely underestimated. The battle between the Abwehr and the FBI was a war without bombs, but with enormous consequences. It revealed that information, when organized, shared, and believed, could defeat even the most disciplined enemy. It showed that democracy's greatest strength was not control, but cooperation. The German spies, who crossed the ocean expecting chaos, found precision. They came seeking weakness and found unity. They believed in secrecy. America believed in truth, and truth won. By the time the war ended, the Abwehr had collapsed, the FBI had risen, and the rules of espionage had changed forever. The invisible front was no longer invisible, and the shock it caused would echo through every intelligence agency for generations to come.